So you know how YouTubers make videos about all the games they find overrated, and then they'll say something like, I don't actually like the term overrated, I just use it because it makes a better title? Well, to that I have to say, screw you. I'm making a video with the worse but more accurate title. Anyways, in this video, I'll be going over 3 games that I generally don't like as much as other people. I still love and respect these 3 games, but I think they fall flat of what the general consensus surrounding them is. I'll try my best to be as constructive as possible in my reviews, because really one of the main goals of this channel is just about love for the medium of video games, and constructive criticism is part of that. I don't want this video to be just shitting all over stuff people love, you know? With that said, let's get into the first game I'll discuss here, Resident Evil 2 Remake. Now, I loved Resident Evil 7 and Resident Evil Village, but the biggest flaw I think Resident Evil 2 Remake has compared to them is a lack of strong impact in all of your actions, in a way that feels not hopeless but flat. The layout of each area is quite open and allows you to solve their puzzles at your own pace. That's one of the cornerstones of modern Resident Evil, and it makes for a great format, allowing for action and horror to have their place alongside exploration and survival. So the base of the game is solid and a great start, and I can have fun with the game at times. But other parts just make the game feel off. Against the enemies of the game, your actions don't feel like they do much, but it ends up making it feel irritating. Only like 40% of the enemies in the game actually pose any kind of threat and are just easy to skip by. And then those enemies are huge bullet sponges. I can deal with that as long as it feels like you're at least doing something to them. It doesn't really feel like that in this game, so it makes enemies generally just cross into annoying. And that stupid pop noise your gun makes is just awful. Maybe that's just me being nitpicky though. Anyways, it's important to note that these things still do offer an experience filled with tension. Emptying out a lot of bullets or avoiding an enemy is still engaging with that enemy. So it's not like every enemy in the game is boring or whatever. They're still filled with tension and great when they can be, but they just sort of feel bland compared to other parts of the game. And then there's Mr. X, the impossible to kill, recurring bad guy who stalks you throughout the entire game and generally makes Leon or Claire's lives harder. He's great, fills the game with lots of much needed tension, and makes it an overall better experience. I do end up wishing there was more of him though. Maybe more scripted encounters or chances to fight him, or rather fight him off, would have been welcome, because most of the time when you encounter him, you just run past him and there's not really anything interesting with him. The areas you move through the majority of the game feel quite large and wide, but are missing a lot of the compactness I liked about other Resident Evil games. The atmosphere of the game isn't too unique, especially once you're past the police station part, and it really doesn't feel like it's designed around the aimlessness that's prevalent throughout it. A majority of the game, quite aimless, and ends up being a lot of wandering around. That's fine, but after a while, it's the same areas you go through again and again, and it gets quite stale when the game doesn't give you too many new stuff. I just find traversing those areas quite bland overall. The horror suffers for it when you're moving through the same place so many times without enemies presenting too much of a big threat. So you get more familiar with everything, and it gets less interesting. Resident Evil 2 just has too much aimlessness, in my opinion. And I'm not even trying to comment on how good of a remake this is, but the PS1 version, just looking at footage, it seems to have a lot better atmosphere than this game. By the way, the police station is like the only part of this game that's actually somewhat memorable. The later laboratory and sewer areas are fine, but they're just not that memorable and feel kind of generic. When I say Resident Evil 2's biggest problem is a lack of impact, what I mean to say is that everything feels softer and safer than 7 and Village. The areas you go through are more familiar and don't have much of a horror aspect intrinsic to them, beyond like, oh no, evil zombies and scary stuff, oh no. 7 and Village's horror is quite atmosphere-based, and it seems a family to tie all those terrifying areas together. Village gets shit for the action segments, but Resident Evil 2 is where most of the horror is gore and action, rather than just the psychological aspect. You don't get the baby segment in Resident Evil 2. I can understand preferring what RE2 has to offer, but as for me, you can do better when it comes to a Resident Evil game. I really do not want to play Resident Evil 3 Remake, and I refuse to buy it for anything more than like $10, although I do really want to play Resident Evil 4 Remake. Anyways, the next game I'll talk about on here is one I originally wanted to avoid due to its surface level similarities to Resident Evil 2 Remake in the genre and stuff. However, upon considering further, I think there are more than enough differences to justify them both being their own entries in this list. The game I'm talking about is Alan Wake. Now, Alan Wake is a very funny game, and a lot of it has the vibe of a B-movie while taking it itself 110% seriously. I can respect that. It's a fine story, even if it's pretty silly at times. Occasionally it gets so ridiculous, it's impossible not to love it, such as when you beat a bunch of shadow monsters at a rock concert, or the one cop who calls Alan Wake the name of an American author each time, or the awful voice acting. That's stupid and great.
Damn it, Barry, they'll kill her!
Unfortunately though, the game felt completely out of its depth when it tries to be anything more and take itself seriously. It just feels very generic, making its heavy themes or elements not really land. I could honestly barely even tell whether I was laughing at or with the game, but when it was a serious moment coming flat because of bad voice acting or direction, yeah, that was me laughing at it. A lot of the stuff the game tries to do were really interesting ideas, done in a mediocre way in execution. Like I said before, it's a fun story, but I almost feel as if the parts that weren't supposed to resonate with me too much resonated a lot more than the parts that were intended to resonate with me. That could be either a good or bad thing depending on how you see it, but I absolutely see it as a flaw in the developer's intent. Earlier on, the game plays with the idea of questioning Alan's sanity. Are these things really happening, or did he just have a shitso meltdown and fucking kill a guy? Interesting plotline, but you stop questioning your own sanity pretty quickly when Barry confirms, yeah, that shit is all real when it happens to him too. The game also pays tribute to many old horror movies, but does so in a pretty lame way by making the characters have to comment on it every single time. I counted at least 3 times this happened. Birds are attacking you? Oh wow, just like Hitchcock movie. A car comes to life, haha, this certainly reminds you of Christine. Oh wow, he just burst through the door with an axe, just like The Shining. Why can't you just let those things stand on their own? This is like Ready Player One type dialogue. Is this a small nitpick? Perhaps, but it counts among the many, many times I sighed at the game when it does a cool thing in a non-cool way. So look, this game has complex themes. I know that. This is actually a surprisingly deep game once you look into it. I have nothing but admiration for the themes expressed in this story, but I just wish they were better done, and better showcased in the main story, not through an absurd amount of notes or whatever. And even then, what's actually shown in the cutscenes, I'm sorry, they're just hard to take seriously. The main combat loop of the game is pretty fun, and I liked it even if it definitely focused a lot more towards action, and uses horror tropes as a playground instead of actually understanding what they are. Kind of like my criticism with Resident Evil 2, but turned up a little bit more, because this feels further away from a psychological horror game than what RE2 was. The main thing with its enemies is that they're people surrounded with darkness and manifestations of various tropes. Well, not really. They're extremely similar human-type enemies who say one cliché one-liner before attacking you. Basically common phrases people say a lot. Funny, but what am I supposed to feel when a big shadow monster comes out to me and says, "Grr, if you have mesothelioma, you may be entitled to financial compensation," because I don't feel the dread the game is probably trying to instill in me. Perhaps if I was a fan of Twin Peaks or Stephen King novels that this game takes so much inspiration from, I might enjoy it more. But as of now, the ideas of the game feel cool yet underdeveloped, and the combat feels like it could be from a different game entirely. Maybe it's just me. It definitely has the vibes of those games where a European studio tries everything in their power to look and feel like an American AAA game, but not really having the budget for it. The mediocre voice acting, floaty controls, and janky shooting feels like results of this. I love this game when it does shine and its story is able to capture my attention. But overall, this is such an aggressively 2010 game. I do hope the sequel can fix some of the issues I had with it. Anyways, there's no easy way to say this, but the next game I'm talking about is Super Mario Galaxy. Okay, don't worry, that was a joke. Psych, it wasn't, we're doing this. Super Mario Galaxy is one of the greatest games out there. I have a ton of nostalgia for it, and it is one of the first games I've ever played. I've gotten all 120 stars in it. Its soundtrack and beautiful planets and space scenes makes it absurd to call it anything other than a masterpiece. But in their pursuit of the perfect work of art Mario game, I think Super Mario Galaxy falls short of the gameplay side of things, compared to other Mario titles in a notable way. I find Super Mario Galaxy to be one of the weaker open 3D Mario games. I preferred 64, Odyssey, and even Sunshine to it. What I immediately noticed about Super Mario Galaxy is that the chaotic leaps and bounds Mario can make in all those previously mentioned games aren't really a thing here. Well, they're a thing, but they're downplayed to the point that the easy to pick up, difficult to master nature of platforming I love about the series isn't quite here. And so one of the core tenets I like about the Mario series feels lacking. There's a tall building or something in 64 that looks difficult to get to with just a jump. You have some options. You can ground pound jump and then wall jump and dive into the building. Or in Sunshine, you can do a wall jump and boost yourself with Flood. In Odyssey, you can do a cappy dive and dive again. In Galaxy, your jumps are less pronounced. And all that can really help you in those situations is a kind of weak spin attack. Your movements are overall not as breezy, chaotic, and fun as other Mario games, and the overall sense of freedom suffers because of it. Not freedom in how open the levels are, because I don't mind a linear experience, but rather freedom in how you can engage with everything. You don't have as many options anymore, and I personally found it to be a flaw with the game. I'll put it this way. There's nothing objectively weaker about the levels Galaxy has than 64, Sunshine, and Odyssey. But they don't feel like playgrounds the way they do in those games. And while I have every single level and the memories I have them in those games etched into my mind, I don't think I can really say the same about Super Mario Galaxy. So, is it fair to say the difficulty balancing of Super Mario Galaxy is just bad? Don't get me wrong, this is an issue that affects mainline Mario games before and after it, but it's still a flaw in Galaxy. This game is unbelievably easy for the majority of the time, and there are parts of it that are just a complete joke, and a significant amount of the game is not challenging whatsoever. Now the game remedies this by offering plenty of challenge with its comments and certain levels with gimmicks, especially with motion controls. That's a good system, and I like it, and I enjoy the challenge it presents, but it can't prevent the majority of the game from being piss easy. Plus, the difficulty spikes of some of those challenges are very jarring and frustrating. What the actual fuck was that one where you throw bombs and destroy trash? That was an awful mission. The motion control ones too can be quite the difficulty spike, which I wouldn't even mind if the game wasn't so easy otherwise. It's going from 0 to 100, and the 100 can be fun, it's just jarring. And that 0 might struggle to be as fun. Anyways, the difficulty of this game is a bizarre patchwork and doesn't feel too organic. Other Marios have this problem too, so don't go complaining that I didn't acknowledge that. But it doesn't change the fact that it's a problem. It doesn't change the piss ease of Galaxy. I never heard piss easy used as a noun before. The Mario series has stayed the #1 video game series for so long for a good reason, and have created a standard of quality and fun all future games are automatically held to. As such a big series, I think it's fair to hold Galaxy to that standard, and it slips behind what has been established before it in my opinion. It's for that reason I don't like Galaxy as much as the general consensus. I 100% understand why people love it so much, and why it's so many people's favorite game. I'm just not quite as in love with it myself. I want you all to know that this video being titled this way wasn't just for a gag. I really enjoyed each game I talked about today, and spreading love of video games, Again, always been one of the primary goals of this channel. I do kind of hate the word overrated. I find it extremely important to criticize games when you might not like them as much as other people. Not only is acknowledging, hey, I'm not a big fan of this when others do like it, part of being your own individual, it's also part of how video games can get better in general. No game is ever perfect. They're just not, and no matter how good a game is, there's always something it can improve upon, and someone who won't like it. Look at Breath of the Wild, for example. Tons of people called that a perfect game, and there were people who said you couldn't improve upon it. Only for that exact thing to happen in Tears of the Kingdom, causing to say, okay, now it's perfect. Newsflash, it really isn't. Whatever DLC comes next will improve it. The point is, it's okay to be that guy. It's okay to say, I respect this thing, but don't like it that much. Because if that guy didn't exist, we wouldn't have video games at all. We wouldn't have someone who said, okay, ping pong is cool, but maybe computers could make it cooler? So please, don't be afraid to criticize stuff, and criticize them harshly if necessary. Because popularity should never be a shield against criticism, and criticism is necessary for improvement to happen. Any form of genuine criticism should be welcome, even if you might think it harsh. Anyways, that's going to be it for today, so thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you later. Anyways, I now have videos shooting on Smash Ultimate, Kirby, and Super Mario Galaxy. That's my third strike, meaning Nintendo fans will be coming to my house to kill me soon. Hopefully I can fend them off and continue making videos.